General Vorath Keln had never known fear in his 300 years of life. He had led armies across 17 star systems. He had crushed rebellions, conquered worlds, and watched entire civilizations fall to their knees before the might of the Thraci Empire. His scarred carapace told the story of 100 battles won. His name alone was enough to make enemy commanders surrender. But standing before the eternal conclave in the great chamber of the High Throne, Vorath felt something cold crawling through his blood. It was not fear of the ancient rulers who sat above him on their floating platforms. It was fear of what he had seen in the darkness between stars. The chamber was vast and beautiful. Living light flowed through the walls like rivers of gold. The 12 members of the conclave watched him with their many eyes, their long bodies wrapped in robes of woven starlight. They had ruled the empire for 10,000 years. They believed they would rule for 10,000 more. Vorath knew they were wrong. "Speak, General," said the High Arbiter, the oldest and most powerful of the conclave. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. "You requested this audience. You claimed it was urgent. We are listening." Vorath took a deep breath. He had practiced this speech 1,000 times on the long journey home. He knew they would not believe him. He had to try anyway. 3 cycles ago, I was sent to survey the outer reaches of the galaxy," he began. "We found a small yellow star with 8 planets. The 3rd planet was covered in water and green land. It was home to a species we had never seen before." "Another primitive world," said one of the conclave members with a dismissive wave. "We have cataloged thousands of them. What makes this one worthy of our attention?" "I watched them for 3 cycles," Vorath continued. "I studied them. I learned their languages. I observed their history." He paused. "And I came here to warn you. We must not touch this world. We must leave these creatures alone." Silence fell over the chamber. Then the High Arbiter laughed. It was a cold, ancient sound. "You wish us to fear a species that has not even left their own planet? A species still burning dead plants for energy? This is why you demanded an audience with the conclave." "They call themselves humans," Vorath said. "And yes, they are primitive by our standards. They have not discovered faster than light travel. Their weapons are crude. They live short lives, barely 100 years at most. But I have seen things that keep me awake at night." He touched a panel on his wrist, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a blue and green world spinning slowly in the void. 40 of their years ago, they split the atom and created weapons that could destroy cities in a single flash. They used these weapons on each other. 2 cities burned. Hundreds of thousands died in moments. The image changed to show the mushroom clouds rising over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Any other species would have abandoned such terrible power. These humans? They built more. They built enough to destroy their entire world several times over. "Self-destructive primitives," another conclave member said. "They will kill themselves before they ever reach the stars." "That is what I thought at first," Vorath admitted. "But then I looked deeper. I studied their history." The hologram shifted again, showing scenes of human warfare across the ages. "They have fought each other constantly for their entire existence. War after war after war. And yet they never break. They never give up. Every time they destroy themselves, they rebuild. Every time they fall, they rise again. Stronger, smarter, more dangerous." He showed them images of human soldiers fighting in trenches filled with mud and poison gas. He showed them cities reduced to rubble, then rebuilt into gleaming towers. He showed them rockets launching into the sky, carrying humans to their moon and beyond. "They adapt faster than any species I have ever seen," Vorath said. "They learn from every defeat. They turn their enemies' weapons against them. And they hold grudges that last for generations. There are humans alive today who still hate other humans for wars fought centuries ago. The High Arbiter leaned forward slightly. You paint a picture of violent animals. This only proves they are a threat that should be eliminated before they become a problem. No. Vorath stepped forward, his voice rising. That is exactly what we must not do. The Villani surrendered when we blockaded their homeworld. They saw our power and they submitted. The Krix tried to fight, but when we destroyed their fleet, they negotiated. They accepted defeat. He shook his head slowly. Humans will not do this. They cannot do this. Surrender is not in their nature. Every species surrenders when faced with certain death, the High Arbiter said calmly. Not this one. Vorath's voice was quiet now, almost a whisper. I found records of a human battle. 300 of their warriors were surrounded by an army of thousands. They had no hope of victory, no hope of survival. They knew they would die. Do you know what they did? The conclave waited in silence. They fought anyway. They fought until every single one of them was dead. And 2,000 years later, their people still tell stories about those 300 warriors. They are heroes, legends. Vorath looked up at the ancient rulers. Humans do not fear death the way other species do. They see it as a price worth paying. And when they fight, they do not fight to survive. They fight to make their enemies bleed. The High Arbiter was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was cold. General Vorath, you have served the Empire well for 3 centuries. Your victories have expanded our borders and filled our treasury. But I think your time in the void has affected your mind. He gestured with one long tendril. These humans are primitives. They cannot threaten an empire that has ruled for 10,000 years. Your fears are the fantasies of an old soldier who's been alone too long. I am asking you to listen, Vorath said desperately. Leave them alone. Do not give them a reason to unite against us. Do not teach them that the galaxy is full of enemies. The invasion will proceed as planned, the High Arbiter declared. Their world has resources we need. Their population will serve us. And you, General, will take a rest. A long rest. Your services are no longer required. Vorath felt the guards moving behind him. He did not resist as they took his weapons. You are making a mistake, he said quietly. The greatest mistake in the history of our empire. Remove him, the High Arbiter ordered Dot as they dragged him from the chamber. Vorath looked back one last time at the rulers of the Thraci Empire. They were already discussing other matters, already forgetting his warning. They would remember it soon enough. The whole galaxy would remember. The Thraci Armada arrived in Earth's solar system on a quiet Tuesday morning. 200 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Jupiter, their massive hulls blocking out the distant stars. They were beautiful in a terrible way. Their surfaces covered in flowing patterns of living metal that shifted and changed like water. Commander Thel stood on the bridge of the flagship and looked at the small blue world in the distance. It seemed so fragile, so easy to break. Begin scanning, he ordered. I want a complete picture of their defenses before we proceed. His officers worked quickly. The reports came in within minutes, and Thel felt himself relaxing. The humans had detected their arrival. Primitive radio signals were bouncing between their nations, full of fear and confusion. Their satellites were watching the Armada, but their weapons could not reach it. They had nuclear missiles, yes, but nothing that could scratch Thraci shields. They are divided into nearly 200 separate nations, his intelligence officer reported. Many of them are hostile to each other. They have been fighting among themselves for their entire history. Thel smiled. Perfect. They will be too busy blaming each other to mount a real defense. Send the message. The broadcast was simple. It was sent in every human language, played on every television and radio on the planet. The Thraci Empire claimed Earth and all its resources. Humanity would serve the Empire or be destroyed. They had one day to surrender. The humans did not surrender. Instead, something strange happened. Something the Thirassi had never seen before. Within hours, the leaders of every major nation were talking to each other. Old enemies put aside centuries of hatred. Countries that had been pointing nuclear weapons at each other for decades suddenly became allies. By the end of the day, every human military on the planet was operating under a single unified command. Thel was not concerned. "It changes nothing," he told his officers. "They can unite all they want. They cannot fight us." He was wrong. The Thirassi began their invasion by destroying Snowpalo. It was meant to be a demonstration of power, a message to the humans that resistance was pointless. 12 million people lived in that city. In a single flash of light from orbit, they were gone. Thel expected the humans to fall into despair. He expected them to surrender, or at least to begin negotiating. Instead, they attacked. Human jets rose from every continent. They were primitive things, burning chemical fuel, armed with missiles that should have been useless against Thirassi technology. Most of them were shot down before they could even reach the upper atmosphere. But some got through. Some actually managed to damage Thirassi ships. How is this possible? Thel demanded. "Our shields should stop their weapons completely." "They modified their missiles," his weapons officer said, his voice shaking. "In less than 12 hours, they figured out the frequency of our shields and adjusted their nuclear warheads to punch through." 12 hours. The Thirassi had spent centuries developing their shield technology. Humans had cracked it in half a day. The ground invasion was supposed to take 6 days. 100,000 Thirassi soldiers landed in North America, supported by air power and orbital bombardment. They had armor that could stop any human bullet. They had weapons that could vaporize tanks. They had complete control of the skies. The 6-day campaign became 14 months of hell. Humans died by the millions. Their cities burned. Their armies were shattered. But they would not stop fighting. Every building became a fortress. Every street became a trap. Farmers with hunting rifles ambushed Thirassi patrols. Children threw homemade explosives at armored vehicles. Old women poisoned water supplies. The dead were replaced by volunteers who knew they were going to die and came anyway. Thel read the reports from the front lines with growing horror. His soldiers were winning every battle, but they were losing the war. "They do not fight like a species seeking survival," one of his commanders wrote. "They fight like a species seeking revenge. They do not care about their own lives. They only care about taking as many of us with them as possible. Every soldier we lose costs us years of training and resources. Every soldier they lose is replaced within days. We are winning, but we are bleeding. And they never stop." The Thirassi captured Washington, but the human government had already moved. They captured New York, but the humans kept fighting from the subway tunnels. They captured Los Angeles, but snipers still killed their soldiers every single day. Human scientists worked in hidden bunkers, studying captured Thirassi equipment. Human engineers built new weapons in secret factories. Human soldiers learned Thirassi weaknesses and shared that knowledge through underground networks that the invaders could not find or destroy. 3 years into the war, Thel sent a message to the Conclave. It was the first time he had admitted doubt. "We have conquered their world," he wrote. "We control their cities. We have killed hundreds of millions of them. But they are not beaten. They learn faster than we can adapt. They share information instantly across their entire planet. Every tactic we use works once, maybe twice. Then they find a counter. They are not fighting to win. They are fighting to make the war cost us more than it is worth." The Conclave's response was simple. Continue the campaign, increase the forces, crush the resistance. Thel obeyed. He had no choice. But late at night, alone in his quarters, he thought about the old general who had tried to warn them. Vorath had been exiled for cowardice. Vorath had been mocked for fearing primitives. Vorath had been right. On the distant moon where he lived in exile, General Vorath received the reports from Earth. He read them carefully, and each one confirmed his worst fears. The Thyrassi were winning battles and losing the war. The humans were bleeding, but not breaking. And with every passing day, they were learning more about their enemy. Vorath had seen this pattern before. He had studied human history. He knew what came next. First, they would lose their world. Then they would hate. Then they would learn. Then they would build Dot, and then they would come for revenge. He looked up at the stars and wondered which ones would burn first when humans finally reached them. Because they would reach them. It might take 10 years or 50, but humans did not forget. They did not forgive, and they were very, very good at war. The Thyrassi Empire had ruled for 10,000 years. Vorath suspected it would not rule for 10,000 more. He had tried to warn them. They had refused to listen. Now they would pay the price. Deep beneath the frozen surface of Europa, Jupiter's ice moon, a city was growing. The Thyrassi did not know it existed. Their sensors watched Earth, tracked human ships, and monitored the resistance on the ground. They never thought to look at the frozen moons of the outer planets. Why would they? Humans were primitive creatures who had barely touched their own moon. They could not possibly have spread so far. But humans were full of surprises. The evacuation had begun in the first weeks of the invasion. While the Thyrassi focused on Earth, thousands of ships had quietly slipped away into the darkness. They carried scientists, engineers, soldiers, and families. They carried seeds, genetic samples, and manufacturing equipment. They carried the knowledge of human civilization stored on billions of hard drives. They carried hope. Dr. Sarah Chun was one of the first to arrive on Europa. She was a physicist who had spent her career studying theoretical propulsion systems. Before the invasion, her work had been considered interesting, but impractical. No government wanted to fund research into faster-than-light travel when they could barely afford to maintain their existing space. Programs. The invasion changed everything. The first captured Thyrassi ship arrived 6 months after we established the base, Sarah later recalled. It was a small scout vessel, barely damaged. Our soldiers had managed to disable it with a nuclear EMP burst and tow it to Jupiter before the Thyrassi noticed it was missing. She remembered the moment they opened the hull and looked inside. The technology was beyond anything humans had imagined. Power systems that produced more energy than entire cities. Materials stronger than anything on Earth. And the engine, the beautiful impossible engine that bent space itself. Most species would have studied such technology for decades before attempting to replicate it. Humans did not have decades. We had the engine apart within 2 weeks, Sarah said. Not because we were smarter than the Thyrassi. We were not. But we had thousands of engineers working together, sharing every discovery instantly. We had no time for politics or secrets. We had one goal: figure out how it worked, build our own, and fight back. The Thyrassi FTL drive used rare crystals that took centuries to grow in the hearts of dying stars. Humans could not duplicate this process. So they found another way. A team in the chemistry lab discovered that certain synthetic compounds could mimic the crystal's properties. They were not as efficient, but they worked. A team in the physics lab found ways to amplify the effect. A team in the engineering lab built a prototype. 11 months after capturing their first alien ship, humans had built their own faster-than-light engine. It was ugly. It was dangerous. It used twice as much fuel and produced half the speed. But it worked, and that was just the beginning. Human engineers did not simply copy Thyrassi technology. They improved it. They found mistakes the aliens had made, inefficiencies they had accepted for thousands of years because no one had ever questioned them. The Thraci shield generators wasted 30% of their power. Human engineers cut that waste in half. Thraci weapons were elegant and precise. Human weapons were crude, brutal, and twice as powerful. The Thraci are ancient, one engineer explained. They developed their technology slowly, over millennia. Each generation made small improvements on the work of the last. But they stopped asking why things worked the way they did. They stopped looking for better solutions. We had no such limits. We were starting from nothing, so we questioned everything. 2 years after the invasion began, the first human-built warship lifted off. From the hidden shipyard on Europa. They called it the UES Defiance. It was not beautiful. Its hull was patched together from stolen alien metal and human steel. Its weapons were a mix of human missiles and reverse-engineered alien plasma cannons. Its crew was made up of soldiers who had never been to space and scientists who had never fired a weapon. But when does it? Defiance dropped out of FTL, travel behind a Thraci patrol squadron. It was the most dangerous thing in that region of space. The battle lasted 4 minutes. 3 Thraci ships were destroyed before they could even raise their shields. The 4th managed to fire back, but its weapons splashed harmlessly against the Defiance's improved shields. Captain James Rivera, a former submarine commander, watched the alien ship explode with no expression on his face. "Send no message," he ordered. "Leave no survivors. The Thraci cannot know we are coming." Back on Earth, the Resistance received word of the victory through a secret quantum communication channel. For the first time in 3 years, humans had hope. More ships were built. More volunteers were trained. The hidden bases expanded to include facilities on Titan, Ganymede, and dozens of asteroids. Human industry, once devoted to consumer goods and pointless luxuries, now focused entirely on war. 5 years after the invasion, the human fleet numbered over 200 ships. They were outnumbered by the Thraci forces in the solar system, but not by as much as the aliens believed. General Vorath received reports of the human fleet through his own intelligence network. He had been exiled, but he still had friends in the military. What he read made him close his eyes and whisper a prayer to gods he had stopped believing in long ago. "They did it," he said to himself. "They actually did it." The conclave summoned him from exile the next day. He stood before them in the same chamber where they had dismissed his warnings 3 years earlier. Their faces were not so confident now. "You knew this would happen," the High Arbiter accused. "You predicted this." "I did," Vorath agreed. "And you did not listen. We are listening now. How do we stop them?" Vorath almost laughed. Almost. "You cannot stop them. You could have negotiated with them before the invasion. You could have offered them a place in the Empire as partners rather than slaves. You could have left them alone entirely. But you chose to hurt them. You chose to give them a reason to hate us. And now they do. There must be something we can do," another conclave member said desperately. Vorath thought for a long moment. "Surrender," he finally said. "Surrender now, completely and unconditionally. Give them everything they want. Maybe if we show them enough submission, they will be satisfied with just taking back their world. Surrender?" The High Arbiter's voice was filled with disgust. "The Thraci Empire has never surrendered to anyone. Then the Thraci Empire will learn what happens when you make enemies of a species that does not know how to give up." Vorath turned and walked toward the door. "You asked for my advice. I gave it. Do with it what you will." He did not look back. He already knew they would not listen. They never did. And the price of their pride was already higher than they could imagine. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of the U East Vengeance. the flagship of the human Second Fleet. Through the massive windows, she could see the green world of Thraci colony Veth Prime spinning slowly below. It was a beautiful planet, covered in farms that fed billions of Thraci across the Empire. She felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "Admiral, the deployment is complete," her tactical officer reported. "Atmospheric seeders are in position." Chen Wei nodded. "Begin the operation." Hundreds of small pods fell from the human ships into the atmosphere of Veth Prime. They were not bombs. They did not explode. They simply released clouds of engineered spores into the wind. Within 3 weeks, every food crop on the planet would be dead. Within 3 months, the Thraci colony would face starvation. Within a year, billions would die unless the Empire sent massive relief supplies from other systems. Supplies they could barely spare. The human counter-invasion had begun 2 years earlier, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Thraci had expected a conventional war. They expected fleet battles, planetary invasions, and slow territorial expansion. Humans had studied 1,000 years of their own military history and learned different lessons. They did not come to conquer. They came to destroy. Human special forces infiltrated Thraci worlds, spreading disease, poisoning water supplies, and assassinating leaders. Human hackers broke into Thraci computer networks and spread chaos through their financial systems. Human ships appeared from nowhere, struck supply convoys, and vanished before help could arrive. Every Thraci world lived in fear. Every Thraci official wondered if they would be next. The empire that had stood for 10,000 years was bleeding from 1,000,000 cuts. "Admiral." Chen Wei broadcast a message that was heard across 100 star systems. Her face appeared on screens in Thraci homes, in military bases, in the halls of the Conclave itself. "You came to our home," she said, her voice calm and cold. "You burned our cities. You slaughtered our children. You laughed when we begged for mercy. Did you think we would simply forgive? Did you think we would stop at taking back what was ours?" She leaned forward, and her eyes seemed to look into the soul of every Thraci who watched. "We are humanity. We remember everything, and we never forgive." The message ended. The Empire trembled. On Earth, the liberation had taken 8 months of bloody fighting. Human forces had landed on their own homeworld like avenging angels, and the Thraci occupation collapsed under their fury. Every collaborator was hunted down. Every Thraci soldier was given one chance to surrender. Most refused. They died anyway. The population of Earth had fallen from 8 billion to less than 5 billion during the occupation. 3 billion humans had died to alien weapons, to starvation, to disease. The survivors did not mourn. They did not cry. They built more ships. They trained more soldiers. They went to war. General Marcus Stone led the assault on the Thraci military headquarters on the fortress world of Krex. His forces were outnumbered 3 to 1. The Thraci fortress had shields that could withstand orbital bombardment for months. Stone did not attack the shields. He attacked the generators, a team of human special forces. Volunteers who knew they would not survive crashed a transport ship directly into the power station. The explosion killed them all, but it brought down the shields for 17 seconds. 17 seconds was enough. Human ships poured fire into the exposed fortress. Thraci soldiers died by the thousands. Within an hour, General Stone was standing in the enemy command center, surrounded by the bodies of the defenders. "Send a message to the Conclave," he ordered. "Tell them Krex has fallen. Tell them we are coming for them next." The Thraci tried to fight back. They still had more ships, more soldiers, more resources than humanity. They launched counterattacks. They built new weapons. They even tried to negotiate. The negotiations lasted exactly 1 day. Human diplomats presented their terms. unconditional surrender, war crime tribunals for every commander who had participated in the Earth invasion, and the complete dissolution of the Tharasi military. The Tharasi negotiators refused. They offered compromises, territory, resources, anything but total submission. The human ambassador looked at them with eyes that held no mercy. "You misunderstand," she said. "These are not terms for negotiation. This is what will happen. The only question is whether it happens before or after we destroy everything you have ever built." The negotiations ended. The war continued. Across the empire, species that had been conquered by the Tharasi began to rise up. Human agents brought them weapons, training, and hope. Ancient enemies of the empire offered their support. What had been a war between two species became a war between humanity and its allies against the crumbling Tharasi state. General Varath watched it all from his estate on a distant moon. He received reports from friends still in the military, and each one was worse than the last. The Third Fleet destroyed. The colony on Mora Prime liberated by rebels. The Conclave bunkers on Tharasia Prime being fortified for a final stand. One day, a visitor arrived at his estate. It was a Tharasi officer, young and frightened, sent by the Conclave. "They want you to lead our forces," the officer said. "They believe you are the only one who can defeat the humans." Vorath laughed. It was not a happy sound. 3 years ago, they exiled me for warning them about this exact situation. Now they want me to save them? He shook his head. "I have served the Empire for 300 years. I have given everything to it. But I will not lead our soldiers into a war we cannot win." "Cannot win?" The officer looked shocked. "We are the Tharasi Empire. We have ruled for 10,000 years. And now our rule is ending." Vorath walked to his window and looked up at the stars. "The humans will not stop. They will not negotiate. They will not show mercy. Because we showed them no mercy. We taught them that the galaxy is a hostile place where only the strong survive. And they learned that lesson better than any species in history." He turned back to the officer. "Tell the Conclave I decline their offer. Tell them to surrender while they still can. Tell them that every day they continue this war, the final price grows higher." The officer left. Varath knew his message would be ignored. And somewhere out there, human ships were gathering for the final assault. The end was coming. Nothing could stop it now. The sky above Tharasia Prime burned with the light of dying ships. General Varath watched from the balcony of his small house on a moon 3 light-years away. His telescope showed him everything. The human armada, now combined with fleets from a dozen former slave species, surrounding the jeweled homeworld of the Tharasi Empire. The defenders fought bravely. They died anyway. 11 years. That was how long it had taken humanity to go from a conquered planet to the greatest military power in the known galaxy. 11 years from defeat to total victory. Varath had predicted this. He had warned the Conclave. They had refused to listen. Now they were paying the price. The Battle of Tharasia Prime lasted 6 hours. The Tharasi fleet, once the most powerful in the galaxy, was outnumbered 3-1. Human ships moved with perfect coordination, their tactics refined by a decade of constant warfare. Former slaves fought alongside them, eager to repay centuries of oppression. The flagship of the Tharasi Defense Fleet, the Eternal Truth, was the last ship to fall. It had been the pride of the Empire, a massive vessel carrying over 50,000 crew members. Human ships surrounded it and offered surrender. The captain refused. They found his body in the wreckage later, still clutching the controls. The humans respected courage, even in their enemies. They gave him a proper burial in the void. On the surface of Tharasia Prime, the Conclave made their final stand. The ancient rulers had retreated to their deepest bunker, protected by shields that could withstand nuclear bombardment. They believed they could hold out for months, perhaps negotiate from a position of strength. They were wrong. Human engineers had spent years studying thoracic shield technology. They knew every weakness, every flaw. A single carefully targeted bomb, delivered by a volunteer pilot who knew she would not survive, brought down the shields in an instant. Human soldiers poured into the bunker. The fighting was brief and brutal. The High Arbiter was the last to fall. He had ruled the Empire for over 1,000 years. He had seen civilizations rise and crumble. He had believed, until the very end, that the Thoraci were destined to rule forever. A human sergeant stood over his body and looked down without emotion. "For Earth," she said quietly. Then she moved on. The surrender ceremony took place on the steps of the Grand Palace, the ancient seat of Thoraci power. Representatives from every species in the former empire gathered to witness the end of an era. Admiral Chen Wei accepted the surrender on behalf of humanity. She was old now, her hair gray, and her face lined with the weight of the war she had fought. But her eyes were still sharp, still filled with the cold fire that had driven her across the stars. "The Thoraci Empire is dissolved," she announced. "Its military is disbanded. Its leaders will face trial for their crimes. The species it enslaved are free." A cheer rose from the crowd. Species that had lived under Thoraci rule for millennia wept with joy. Flags that had been banned for centuries were raised again. Humanity had won. 3 months later, a human diplomat named Elena Rodriguez arrived at General Varath's estate. She was young, barely 40 years old. Varath had fought in campaigns longer than her entire life. He received her in his garden, where purple flowers grew among rocks that came from a dozen different worlds. She sat across from him, and for a long moment neither spoke. "You are Varath," she finally said. "The general who tried to warn them." "I am. Your warnings were remembered. The records were found in the Conclave archives. You told them exactly what would happen." She paused. "Why?" Varath considered the question. "Because I saw what you were. Not primitives. Not animals. A species that refused to break, no matter the cost. I had studied your history. I knew what you were capable of, and they did not listen. They could not imagine being defeated by creatures they considered inferior. Their arrogance blinded them." He looked at the human diplomat with his many eyes. "That same arrogance nearly destroyed your species. Instead, it destroyed ours." Elena was quiet for a moment. "You were granted clemency because of your warnings. You will not face trial. I know." Varath did not seem grateful. He did not seem anything. "It changes nothing. My people are broken. Our empire is gone. Everything my ancestors built for 10,000 years is dust." "Your people will survive," Elena said. "We are not monsters. We do not seek to destroy you. No, you are worse than monsters." Varath's voice held no anger, only a weary truth. "Monsters can be defeated. They can be killed. But you humans, you cannot be stopped. You adapt to everything. You learn from every failure. You hold grudges that span generations. And you never, ever give up." He leaned back in his chair and looked up at the sky. "The Conclave called you primitives, soft, weak, short-lived. They were not entirely wrong. You are all of these things. But they missed the most important truth about your species." "And what is that?" Elena asked. Varath smiled. It was a sad expression on his alien face. "You are not the species anyone should want as an enemy. Your lives are short, so you live with an urgency we cannot understand. Your bodies are weak, so you build tools to make them strong. Your past is filled with suffering, so you have learned to endure anything. The Conclave thought these were weaknesses. They were your greatest strengths." He stood slowly, his whole body aching from centuries of war. My people were ancient when your species was still climbing down from trees. We had conquered half the galaxy before you learned to use fire. We thought we knew everything about war, about power, about survival. He walked to the edge of his garden and looked out at the distant stars. We were wrong. You taught us that lesson. And it cost us everything. Elena joined him at the edge of the garden. For a moment, they stood together, two species that had been enemies, now bound by history. What happens now? Vorath asked. Now we build something new, Elena said. A federation of free species. No more empires. No more slaves. A galaxy where everyone has a voice. And if someone threatens this new order? Elena's smile was gentle, but her eyes were steel. Then they will learn the same lesson the Thyrassi learned. The same lesson every enemy of humanity has learned since the beginning of our history. She looked up at the stars that now belonged to her people. We are not the strongest. We are not the smartest. We do not live the longest. But we never stop. We never surrender. And we never forget. Vorath nodded slowly. He had warned the Empire about humanity. They had refused to listen. And now the galaxy had a new ruler. The humans had won. They always did.